All right, folks, welcome back to Mike and Maurice's Mind Escape. We have episode number 81 today. Where Did the Road Go? With Seriah Azkath. Seriah hosts a podcast. He also has a weekly radio show on WVBR in Ithaca, New York, Saturday from 11 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time. And his show consists of paranormal, the occult, UFOs, pretty, ancient civilizations, kind of all the juicy stuff that we like to talk about on here as well. What's going on, Seriah? Thanks for coming on.
Oh, absolutely. Love to be here. Actually, the show runs from 10 to 11:30 now. You probably grabbed something I didn't update somewhere.
I grabbed your profile from YouTube, so
that would be it. Yeah.
all good. But thanks for clarifying that. So I wanted to have you on because actually, when I first, I don't know, it was probably 3 or 4 years ago, I had a reawakening with all this kind of stuff. For a long time, I forgot about it and was just living my day-to-day life. I started listening to Joe Rogan a little bit. He had a lot of these ancient civilization, like John Anthony West and Graham Hancock, and that kind of tapped me back into it all. And then I was looking for more of their stuff, and I went on, and you had a lot of John Anthony West and Laird Scranton and, all these great guys on there, these authors and researchers and stuff. So I started really getting into your show, and I thought you had a great radio voice. You have a great voice for this kind of stuff. And you're also an open-minded skeptic, which I like too. I like trying to get down to the bottom of things without just fully believing in something, like you want to think about things from like an objective way. And I like the way you approach that. So how did you get into all this stuff? Like how long have you been doing it? When did you start? Why did you start?
As far as the radio show goes?
Yeah.
I started January 26, 2013 was the first show. Ironically, I hated talk radio. I grew up with my dad listening to Rush Limbaugh, and it drove me nuts. And I wanted, talk radio was just because of that. I was just like, oh, I hate talk radio. I don't. And I really got into Graham Hancock stuff. I found him kind of randomly because the special they had on Discover, either Discover or History Channel, whatever they ran, the 3-part thing that he did. And I used to leave my TV on channels like that while I was doing stuff. I'd be listening to music, but I always had closed captioning on. And so I'm looking at it going, oh, cool, pyramids. And then it's talking about the pyramids being aligned to Orion. And I'm going, wait, what? What is this? Like, hang on, what's on the TV right now? And so I the first book I read from Graham was Heaven's Mirror. And then I started really delving into his stuff, and I was following him online. And he said, "Oh, I'm going to be on Coast to Coast," and I knew what Coast to Coast was, but I had never listened to it.
Right.
And I was like, "Well, you know what? I don't like talk radio, but I want to hear Graham Hancock." And I'm like, "I'll probably listen to a few minutes of it and then get tired of it." And instead, I listened to the whole show, and was just like, "That was awesome." Okay. And then he posted like a torrent or something with all his Coast to Coast appearances, and I'm like, "Yeah, I want that." So I downloaded that and started listening through them, and then started going, there's got to be other shows out there like this, right? And eventually, I was listening to a host of different podcasts and stuff, and I was like, this is, clearly I was wrong. I like talk radio. It just has to be the right talk radio. Right. And then I would hear people interviewing people I wanted to talk about, and they clearly knew nothing about the person. There was one in particular that put me over the edge, and they had Jesse Ventura on. And I'm a big wrestling fan, and he's, doing his thing, and the interviewer knew nothing about Jesse and didn't even seem interested. I'm like, okay, why does this person get to talk to Jesse and I don't?
Right.
Yeah. So I was like, could I? And I wasn't thinking podcast at the time. I was thinking radio show, because I've been on the radio for 25 years. Well, now, at the time, 19 or whatever. And so I asked my radio station, I'm like, can I do an hour-long talk show? And they went, yeah, sure.
Sweet.
That's actually funny you say that. That's exactly how I felt. And partly the reason why we started this podcast. I mentioned before we were off air the other reason why, but one of the reasons was I was reading a lot of books, and from reading the books, I have, people that watch the show know I have OCD, so I'm very meticulous about detail and knowledge, and I have a very good memory. So when I listen to people interview people and they don't ask the most obvious questions, or almost like they skimmed over the book, if that makes sense,
Which they probably do a lot of the time.
It was just driving me wild. I'm like, there's all that you could ask this guy like anything, and he's spent all this time doing this research, and that's what you're asking him. Like, it just so I identify with what you're saying with that. I feel the exact same way, and even to this day, the way that we have our show structured is I do a lot of the research, read a lot of the books and stuff, and Maurice is kind of like a little bit more skeptical, but he also and I don't want to speak for him, but I feel like since we started the podcast, I've weeded out a lot of stuff that I believed and whittled it down. And I believe that he's come the opposite way, where things he didn't believe in, he might believe that there's something to it now. So, I mean, what do you think, Maurice?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, I've had some significant events since this has happened. We started this, so it pushed me towards, the more of the metaphysical in that regard. So yeah, I agree with you.
So, but when you got into this and you got into the ancient civilization stuff, it seemed like that was so a lot of your earlier episodes are a lot of ancient civilization type stuff. Yeah. Did you want to evolve from there? Did you get sick of it, or was it just something that you still pay attention to, but it's not?
I think I was reading more of that stuff at the time, so I had read a bunch of Laird Scranton stuff. I always try to read my guests' books, and I've learned from both guests and other sources that a lot of it's not so much the podcast, but like say Coast to Coast, they don't tend to read the books like George Knapp will, but George Norrie, I mean, whatever you think of George Norrie, the fact that he's on 5 or 6 days a week, whatever it is, makes it hard to read the book, even if you wanted to. So they always just send over questions, and I think that's where you get the skimming thing, because they're sent a list of questions and they may not even have ever picked up the book. And I know some podcasts don't read the book, but I always try to read the book. So when I started, it was people whose books I had read recently, for the most part anyway. And I just slowly started making more and more contacts where I could get other people on. So I did want to cover a lot of different stuff, but yeah, the first 6 months is very ancient civilization, lost history type stuff. Except for, I think, David Weatherly, I think, was the second interview I did. And that blew up. That I was lucky to get him so quickly, and it just like went through the roof because we were talking about the Black-Eyed Kids, and that was a huge thing at the time.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about your show that I also like is you have so many different topics too. It's not just ancient civilizations or aliens or occult, or you listen to people's stories, and actually I think you're more of you're kind of how Coast to Coast used to be, in my opinion. Like, if I were to listen to your show sometimes, I think this is kind of and I don't want to say that you sound like it or anything like that, but it's just the feel that I get from you. It's you're more Coast to Coast than anything that's kind of out there right now, in my opinion. Maybe I know what's his face, Jimmy Church, Fade to Black. He does a lot of the same kind of stuff, but just the way that you set the show up and all that kind of stuff, I get that vibe. You let people tell their crazy stories. You let people say their piece, and then you ask them questions, or you're a little bit skeptical, but for the most part, you just let them do their thing and kind of let people decide.
I tried to. I think one of the things that we're missing with a lot of this stuff was we're not asking the right questions. We're making too many assumptions, and so especially with the paranormal stuff, we try to kind of break it down and ask better questions about it. I think the reason so much of the paranormal stuff is stalled is because people have relied on these assumptions that may not be true, that aren't really based on much. But it's also when I started this, my goal was, I didn't think it was going to be successful. I'll be totally honest. I thought it was going to flop because I wasn't going to do the sensationalistic type of stuff. And I figured no one's going to want to hear this. But I figured if I could talk to Robert Schoch, Andrew Collins, and Graham Hancock, I'd be happy.
That's
even if
nice
the show
trio.
bombed. Yeah. And I got Schoch on numerous times. I've had Andrew Collins on a bunch of times. Graham has said that I talked to him when we did the John Anthony West telethon thing, and he said he would come on when the new book came out. And I haven't contacted him yet, but the new book's out, and I'm almost done with it. So hopefully I'll be able to get Graham finally.
That's the Holy Trinity right there.
Yeah,
he's a tough one to get, I think, because we reach out to people too. There's some people that you've had on your show that I've reached out to that maybe because we're not big enough yet. I mean, we've only been doing this for like a year and a half now. I think we've got like 1,100 subscribers on here. And we've been downloaded a little bit less than 100,000 times. So we're not like huge yet. So I think people are kind of hesitant to come on the show. But I think the important thing is, like you said, building relationships, like Inner Traditions is, I have a good relationship with them. They send me books. I read their books, and I try and have their people on. We just had Jude Curvin on. She's a great guest.
What a great connection.
Which one did she write?
She wrote the Cosmic Hologram. It's kind of she kind of went back over, like the theory of relativity and everything, and she kind of looked at entropy again and how, Avi Loeb from Harvard, he's a physicist. He was most recently talking about that flat or cigar shaped asteroid that came in and out of our
whatever.
Yeah. And he has a theory too that, the more the universe expands, the more complex systems form, the more, like if you look at our civilization, it's kind of like a complex version of what's going on out there. So she makes those correlations, and just her ideas are just a little bit different. So she didn't come up with any like new math or anything like that, but it was just re-looking at the data and kind of taking a different approach to it. And a lot of the stuff in the book rang true for me, and I was like, that makes a lot of sense, So
I like Inner Traditions. They're one of the book companies that puts out an enormous amount of stuff that I like.
Yeah. And they have a wide range of topics too. There's hard science stuff, there's metaphysical stuff, there's psychedelic stuff, But I think, and shout out to Inner Traditions, by the way.
Well, they've been plugged multiple times now.
But I think the thing that I've come to the conclusion with, and I don't know if you feel the same, but all of the topics that we've done, whether they're science-based, psychedelic-based, paranormal, alien, UFO, all this stuff, in my opinion, is based around consciousness. And we have this hard problem of it's called the hard problem of consciousness, or it's we don't know what's going on scientifically. So I think what you were talking about, we're not asking the right questions. I think that's absolutely correct, in the sense that we're not even looking at it from the lens that all this stuff is consciousness based. We're looking at it the lens of everything's material, when everything's just atoms vibrating at a certain frequency. So I mean, what's your take on that?
Personal belief is that consciousness comes first. I don't think there's necessarily enough evidence to prove that one way or the other, but I suspect that's where science will eventually end up. It might take centuries, but if we keep progressing, I think we're going to come to the conclusion that everything's conscious in some form, and that consciousness shapes and creates matter. So it's not that we were the side effect of matter, but matter is there for us to work with.
Right.
So yeah, the thing with like a lot of paranormal stuff, when you look at, the thing is, people don't take into account perception. They don't take into account how we perceive reality. They don't take into account how memory works. So if you encounter something you've never experienced before, your brain has to put a face on that, or it's just going to flat out ignore it. And those are like the two options. So if the thing you've heard, if you're in the woods and you're seeing stuff move around, you're going to think Bigfoot, because you're in the woods. But when you look at the actual data, we termed it the wilderness poltergeist, because it's very much like a poltergeist encounter. People have rocks thrown at them. They hear vocalizations. Things are moving.
Right.
And it's like, why are you assuming this is an ape? I mean, the characteristics could be connected to an ape, but they never see an ape. Right. They just have these experiences. So it makes me want to stand back and look at all this stuff for what we're actually experiencing, how our perceptions work. And, reality is something we don't understand. We don't know what reality is. We don't know what life is. We don't know what death is. We have theories, we have guesses, we have beliefs, but we don't know what any of this is. So the best we can do is kind of like modify our beliefs inside this system, and try and understand the best we can, because we can't get outside of it to get a better view.
No, I
That's a phenomenal
absolutely.
breakdown right there. I love
Yeah, I
that.
mean, that resonates kind of exactly with how I feel about it. What do you think about in terms of, okay, so I mentioned that I've whittled down my beliefs based
Mhm.
on doing this and reading and research. Um, when I started out, I believed in a lot more. And since I've whittled it down, there's a few things, a few topics that I think need more research, more looking into. One of those being near death experiences.
Mhm.
My mom actually had one where she passed away for 3 minutes, so it kind of hits close to home. And we've had Eben Alexander and Dr. Penny Sartori on, and all
Lots of
these.
credentials.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but and then the other thing is the psychedelic realm, specifically the DMT realm. I think that there's something there.
Oh,
We
definitely.
had Dr. Andrew Gallimore on, who wrote the book Alien Information Theory. I highly recommend it if you haven't read it. Kind of talks about what we're talking about, how he's trying to develop experiments to go into that realm for a longer period of time to collect data. So that's another thing. And the great question: is there life out there besides us? And my
Sure.
conclusion on that is there something out there? Probability wise, yes. I don't know if it's microscopic organisms, if it's, you know, a lizard, what it could be something that we can't even imagine.
Right. Right.
So I believe something like that. I want to believe that there's real UFOs coming here and all the recent buzz stuff, but it's tough for me. I keep going back and forth with it because there's just so much we don't know. But my conclusion on all that, and I don't know what you think about this, is that the government and all these people studying all this stuff are kind of all in the same boat as the rest of us. They still don't really know. They might have ideas or more data to speculate off of, but I don't think those people really understand what's going on either. They might put the error out that they do, or this agenda or that agenda, but I think we're kind of all in the same boat, in my opinion.
Well, I think the to the stars thing is basic disinformation. It follows patterns of previous disinformation stuff. Um, what the
What,
and I don't think the government
like Bill
knows.
Cooper? You mean like that kind of?
Or what's his name? That they completely ruined his life with Dulcie. Name's escaping me at the moment. But every once in a while, they release bits of information through people. This looks like it's a different iteration of the same type of disinformation. Throw a little bit of truth in and a lot of other stuff in. And I think a lot of the video and stuff they're releasing is more than likely government projects. I think they're drones, they're things we're working on, and they want to see if what people make of it. Can they steer away from the hey, this is technology to oh, this is an unknown.
Because, well, the only thing I'll say about that is this. I mean, I agree with you. I think, well, I'll say this. I think Tom DeLonge
Yeah, I
is
think that's true too.
I
What
think he's
saying.
honest. I think he's an honest
Yes,
guy. He's
I
looking
do
for the
too.
truth, and I think he's just into the subject. And I think he was thrown a couple breadcrumbs, and now he's trying to follow those breadcrumbs. And maybe he has access to more stuff than more people. I think everybody in that organization is for the most part honest. I can't. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know, but what they're doing or what the information that maybe they're being fed might, maybe they're being taken for a little bit of a ride too. I don't know. I will have to wait and see how this unfolds. But um, just this idea that they know so much more and they're just like slowly releasing the information. I don't like that. Like, just say what you know, and then let's move on with it and go from there. I don't like this slow trickle shit.
Paul Benowitz is who I was trying to think of.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But even Bob Lazar, I mean, they're pulling Bob Lazar up now, and I feel like
I like that. See, I there's some that I don't know, for some reason watching him talk, he's either a sociopath
or he's telling the truth.
or he's telling the truth. And
Yes.
if he's telling the truth, do we have anti-gravity? If we have anti-gravity, I believe what you're saying, where it could be our government, or maybe we found one thing and we didn't know what it was and we figured it out. I don't know, but I don't know. So
like-
do you actually do you believe or not believe that something's come here from a different planet? Because I guess that's kind of what it boils down to for everybody, is like, do you believe it's possible that another civilization sent a drone or some sort of UFO?
I think it's possible. I don't think it's what makes up the UFO phenomena.
Okay. So do you think then that we have like anti-gravity technology? Because the
They certainly
physics,
could.
they've analyzed the physics on like real, they had real effects. People look at it and different things, and people in the military, and I know the videos have been analyzed. So it's like the gimbal video. I think everybody points to the Tic Tac video. I don't think the Tic Tac. I think it's the worst one out of the 3 videos that were released.
Yeah.
I think the gimbal one is the best because it shows. Actually, and it aligns with what Bob Lazar was saying about the technology that he saw, the way it flew sideways instead of like your classic, hover disc kind of motion. So I don't know. That's just my thought on it. Do you think though that we have that? You're saying that that's us. So do you think that we have this anti-gravity technology, or do you think it's just...
I think it's entirely possible, and I almost wonder if they've picked up on the electric universe ideas, like the way the stuff Bob Lazar was talking about, kind of feels like that to me. It feels like someone developed the electric universe ideas and was able to create sort of an anti-gravity using electricity, channeling it correctly, and that would make a lot of sense as to why that theory often gets marginalized, because they don't want other people coming up with the same stuff. So if they have if they're ahead of us on this, and they're usually at least 20 years ahead of us, imagine where we'll be in 20 years, and imagine what they have, 20 years ahead of us now.
Yeah.
So having anti-gravity is not that much of a stretch, I don't think. If even just one, it could be one little thing,
right,
that they know that we don't, that allows them to create anti-gravity. Like I got the same impression from Lazar that you did. Either he's completely honest or he's a complete sociopath. I suspect more than likely they brought him in for, again, I think it was a disinformation thing. And part of the reason I think that is he would have had to sign, an NDA going into this. So him announcing this would have thrown him in jail.
right.
People have been thrown in jail for a lot less. And so why did they not throw him in jail? I mean, yeah, he says, well, bad things happen to him, sure, but not the things you would expect if they were trying to keep this quiet. I think if they wanted to keep him quiet, they would have kept him quiet. I think they wanted him talking for whatever reason.
No, that makes sense.
And he's going out there and he's saying, well, we don't have this technology. Well, that you know of.
Right.
We forget that part just because he doesn't know it exists. And you get that with some of these pilots from the videos they're releasing saying, well, we don't have this technology. Well, how would you know? You're not in the know for every bit of technology that exists in the US government, or in the dark, especially in the dark projects of the US government. I'm sure that's a small handful of people who actually know this stuff exists and how it works.
Wasn't that the argument though? Like, that the government it's not the government, that it's the Lockheed Martins, the Skunk Works, the Bell Labs, all these private organizations, because they have the ability, like they're exempt from the Freedom of Information Act, right? So they're the ones doing all this kind of stuff. Now, the problem I have with that is, how come there's never been a whistleblower to come out that says because if we've had this stuff's been going on not just the last few years. People have been
like
seeing
30
this
years
from the 30s and the 40s on,
or even that long. Yeah.
So my question is, where did this come from? Is it some sort of, did the Germans create it possibly during World War II? And when we got Project Paperclip, we got a lot of this technology, maybe. Even then, I think a lot of those guys escaped to Argentina and we're still probably fiddling with shit, So I don't know. I guess, I want to know, how come there's never been anybody? I get what you're saying about the Lazar stuff, and I kind of agree with that. But where's the people on the other side? There has to be somebody. Humanity is not that good at keeping secrets, And I know a lot of stuff's compartmentalized, but
it's compartmentalized. And in all reality, they probably told them, you talk, you die.
Well, that could be it too. You threaten with death. That's a different.
You'll die. All your family will die. Period. So keep your damn mouth shut.
Right.
Yeah. You got to give them a picture of your kids before you can even work there. So,
well, that was the thing about Lazar too. He said that he allowed them to tap his phones and monitor them and that kind of stuff. So obviously, even within the government's projects or secret projects, that they have that kind of stuff going on, And I know that's why he said that he initially came out, was that he feared for his life. It wasn't that he thought humanity should know about this stuff or anything like that. It was purely to protect him, from whatever may come or whatever could happen. But you're right. If they wanted to kill you, they probably just kill you.
Right. And they have many ways of doing it, making it look like an accident.
Mm-hmm.
It's very simple.
No, so I go back and forth on all this stuff. Like I said, I hope maybe To the Stars produces something decent.
Yeah, we want to be entertained. We want to see some aliens.
Well, I read God's Man and War, and some of it's regurgitation stuff, but there was some good stuff in there, and they were talking about some stuff I don't really hear too many people talk about, like they mentioned the Urantia papers in there, which I think is probably one of the best channel pieces of all time, if not the best. But
personally, the only channels, I mean, there's some interesting channel stuff. The Seth material is the only channeled stuff I really will hold up to scrutiny generally.
What's that? I've never even heard of that.
Jane Roberts, late 60s, early 70s, out of Elmira, New York. They were bestsellers at the time. I picked up on them very late because I tend not to believe in channeled stuff.
Sure.
But in researching near-death experiences, every once in a while, someone would reference Seth, and I went, why is this channeled entity keep coming up in otherwise fairly straightforward, papers on near-death experiences? So I picked up one of the books. I had picked it up for like $1 somewhere. I figured it would be worth a laugh to read at some point, and sat down and started reading it. Was completely blown away by the amount of detail and accuracy that Seth carried everything through on. Because he's talking about the death experience before we had near-death experiences.
Right.
Like before that was a thing.
Before we were bringing people back to life.
Well, yeah, I mean, they happened here and there, but the actual, our culture wasn't aware of them till the mid-70s when, who put the book out? I was going to say Monroe, but it's not Monroe. Moody.
Okay, yeah, Raymond Moody, Life After Life.
Right, and so that's where it first got attention. But back in 1971, here's Seth describing pretty much the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And in detail, and actually answering questions that I had later on, because as you go on, you find out that some people have near-death experiences who haven't died. They'll be on the operating table, but they never die, but they have a near-death experience. Other people don't have near-death experiences. And I always sat there and went, well, why is that? Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And said, like, well, some people leave their bodies at different times, just like some people come into their bodies at different times. And it's kind of like, so, we just assume that the point of death is a specific point. And he's like, there's no specific point of death. And I'm reading one thing and then reading his stuff and going, that makes sense. Okay.
Huh.
Yeah. That's pretty cool.
So absolutely. Do you think that there's any correlation? There's the Egyptian god Set, but it's also referred to as Seth too. And the Egyptian
there's no correlation to it.
No correlation. Okay.
And that was the other thing with the Seth material. Seth never claimed to be anyone famous or major in history. He said he had numerous lives. None of them were anything anyone would know. Unlike, say, like Ramtha or something, which was like, the Atlantean warrior prince. And it's like, of course you are,
Right.
Are you familiar with the Urantia papers? Or
a little bit? I don't remember.
Those are pretty interesting.
They predicted a lot of scientific things that weren't known at the time, because there's most people think it's some religious thing where there is religion in there, and there's like a book of Jesus and Jesus's life in between 3 and 33, which you don't really get much of from the Bible and other religious sources, but a large part of it's like scientific stuff and like evolution and that kind of stuff, where it's kind of I don't know, it's just it definitely piqued Maurice and I's interest. And the way we got into it is we're both huge Grateful Dead and Fish fans, and Jerry Garcia, I was looking at something and he was a big avid reader of the Urantia papers, and then from there it said Jimi Hendrix was a big avid reader of the Urantia papers, and Stevie Ray Vaughan and Steve Vai, and it's all these amazing guitar players throughout history that have read this thing. And actually, I'm a musician. I've not really playing in any bands right now, but Maurice is also a musician, so maybe it's something having to do with the creative mind or
or drugs. You don't know.
Yeah,
well,
but
okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead. So you mentioned DMT, and here's the way I'm looking at it at this point. So in DMT, you get the experience of, especially with ayahuasca, gray aliens. People will see grays in their experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So if we look at ancient cave paintings, you see images of what look like grays.
Right.
And of course, the ancient astronauts people will be like, look, grays have been coming here forever. Here's images of them on cave walls.
Right.
But we also know that those cave paintings are often made by shamans in altered states. which then to me says, well, those cave paintings are not aliens. Those cave paintings are what these people are experiencing in an altered state.
Absolutely.
So then you look at the abduction literature, and if you remove the hypnosis component, and the problem with hypnosis is that hypnosis is not a memory recovery tool. And it is being used that way. And what it does is it creates false memories. So particularly when you have people who have a certain belief system or a culture where, you know, someone may have an experience that looks to them like an alien abduction experience, if there's no memory there, their brain is going to create it. So now you have all this literature of aliens abducting people and committing experiments that may be whole cloth created from false memories.
Yeah,
What the abduction experience seems to resemble, and when you take that stuff out, is more of a shamanic awakening. So you may have people who are either in the right place at the right time, where they're being affected by certain energy, or they're just people who are supposed to have this awakening, and it's being hijacked and turned into a horrible alien abduction experience by people who often mean well, but don't understand what's really going on.
No, I mean, that's an interesting look at that phenomena. The thing I would say to that is actually they just released a recent study within the last couple weeks where they did a test with rats where they forced rats into cardiac arrest, and then, you know, they monitored the DM in their their brains, and there was a huge DMT release in their brains, and not just from the pineal gland either. Like, it's just an endogenous chemical found in the rat's brain. Now, a rat's a mammal. We're also mammals. It's been long speculated, Dr. Rick Strassman, that we produce DMT in our brains. It's never been proven. I think you'd have to tap into a live person, and even then, I think you'd have to know what you're looking for and where and everything. We know it's produced in our liver and our lungs. Dr. Rick Strassman wrote a book called DMT, The Soul of Prophecy, where his idea of the ancient Abrahamic religions was these prophets, you know, the different prophets from the Old Testament, were actually being selected or having these DMT dumps or endogenous DMT releases, not necessarily even doing it or extracting it or making it or whatever.
But something was happening to set it off.
Exactly. Whether it be extreme stress or, I mean, he doesn't really speculate on that kind of stuff. It seems like it's more of from a theological standpoint in his book. But I would say that my theory is if they're putting rats into cardiac arrest, if there's people wandering the desert for 40 days and 40 nights, not eating anything and that kind of stuff, your body's in a bad place. And there's a good chance that you could have some sort of near-death experience like that. So that would be my thought on that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I don't think DMT is responsible for near-death experiences.
No, I don't think so either.
Unless it's a mechanism to help us get to that point.
I've talked to people that have
That's what I kind of have a feeling like when you pass away, the DMT kind of helps connect you to the whatever next realm may be.
Yeah.
What do you mean, like priming you to deal with whatever's coming next, or?
Well, kind of, or like you're in a dream state. They think maybe you release DMT in dreams, but maybe that's becoming more of a poo-pooed idea. But I don't know. Like when you pass on, you go into this dream state, and then that's kind of the bridge.
Well, the thing about near-death experiences that fascinates me, the main thing is not the experience people have further into it, but the immediate experience where they're in the room. They can tell you exactly what's going on in the room down to little details, because there's no reason they should have that information.
Right.
It's impossible. And doctors who completely were skeptics have been turned around by this, because they're like, okay, there's no way this person could possibly have known this happened.
Right.
There was a heart doctor back in the 90s. This is actually what led me into the Seth material, where he was a complete skeptic about the near-death experience. He thought it was just a trick of the mind. And so he surveyed, I don't know, 100, 200 of his patients, whatever, whether or not they died. Every single heart patient, he gave the same questionnaire to. And the people, and he asked questions like, what do you think was going on during the resuscitation attempt, et cetera, what was happening during the operation. he found the people who had near-death experiences would 100% accurately describe what was going on. The people who did not were completely off. It wasn't even close. Most of it was based on like what they saw on television, which does not resemble what was really happening.
Right.
So he sat there and he looked at this. He's like, I can't deny that these people are actually seeing this stuff from a different perspective that we don't understand, that does not fit into the materialistic paradigm of Western science. But the case that really fascinates me, and I got her name here, Anita Morjani, I think it is.
Okay.
And she was an Indian woman who had end-stage cancer. And this was all documented. She was dying from it. And she passed away with her relatives and stuff around, and then had a near-death experience and came back and was completely cured of the cancer.
Wow.
So she has all of the documentation prior of how bad the cancer spread throughout her body. And now she's healthy and living in California.
Wow.
Yeah, that's crazy. I have to look into that one for sure.
And it's impossible. I mean, according to medical science, that can't happen.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think what you were mentioning is actually you should try and get Dr. Penny Sartori on your podcast.
I've had said.
Okay.
She's awesome.
She does the thing where you were just talking about, where she does the experiments. Like she's been recently trying to, see if people can remember what they see when they first, like she sets up targets and sees if people can remember the targets when they come back out of it, which is kind of a cool idea. Like that's the kind of research that I think we should be looking at.
I think the problem with the targets is that people focus on the thing that emotionally matters to them.
Yeah.
So a target doesn't emotionally matter to them. They're looking at their own body and going, "What's happening?
Right.
Is that me? What's good?" And they're not thinking, "Hey, is there a thing up above me that I can read?"
Yeah, because I think they were having trouble with people actually finding those targets.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great idea because if someone does get it, then
right. Then you have full exactly.
Yeah,
but I think it's a hard call because emotion is what draws a lot of stuff in, like experience, like precognition often is very emotional experiences. Emotion definitely plays a part of this.
Yeah, my thought was, those targets are still kind of in the material too, so it's like you're separated from this material, so those targets probably don't mean anything. I don't know.
I think what do you think about people seeing, because I know my mom, when she passed for like 3 minutes, she saw my sister who had passed away earlier in her life and her father, and she was told it was not her time, she has to go back. And she was also when she came out of it, the doctor's like, "Who did you see?" So like the doctor who revived her knew that she had some sort of experience even before she said anything. So obviously this is a known phenomena, even with people that maybe don't research it from the medical standpoint. They know that there's this thing happening.
Yeah. And one of the things that Seth had mentioned in the Seth material was when you die, you tend to see what you expect to see, and that it's kind of an illusion that they have to kind of wean you off of eventually.
Gotcha.
But that sometimes loved ones are involved, and I think that. I think that's part of what you're seeing there. You're going into an experience, and even if you say you're an atheist, but deep down you believe you're in Christianity,
right?
You may encounter Jesus,
right?
But you also may encounter loved ones. If you really don't have, you can say you're a Christian, but not really deep down believe it, and maybe you'll encounter loved ones instead, and maybe they're legitimately your loved ones. There have been cases where someone encountered someone who, a relative who died, but they didn't know they were dead.
Wow.
So they've been there and they're like, "Oh, I saw, Aunt Betty." And they're like, "Well, that's ridiculous. Aunt Betty's in California." And then they find out Aunt Betty passed away 2 days ago.
Now that's a movie idea right there.
That's in Dr. Eben Alexander's book, Proof of Heaven, where he was adopted. And he had his near-death experience where he had meningitis and whatever. He was a Harvard-trained neurosurgeon and scientist and everything, and he was an atheist before. So he goes in, has this week-long lucid experience where it's all showing, everything's showing he's brain dead. There's no way he could be having these experiences. He has the experiences. When he comes out of it, he goes and eventually meets his real mother and father and goes to their house, and he sees this picture of this, he explains when he's going through the the near-death experience that he's been guided by this beautiful woman. Well, the beautiful woman he kept seeing was this woman that he saw in a picture at his mother and father's house. And he's like, who's that? And they're like, oh, that was your sister that passed away from them having more kids after they had given him up. So, so that's kind of a interesting book. I mean, there's a lot of skepticism with all that kind of stuff. Is there a motive? Is there this or that? I tend, like I said, with the Bob Lazar thing, I tend to believe people if they seem genuine. You can kind of tell when somebody's lying or fudging the facts.
Yeah, you got to be a real good actor to pull that off.
Yeah, so I mean, I tend to go with it, and the mind's a powerful thing, so.
I think the problem with Eben is that it got hijacked by people who had an agenda. Like, it wasn't him, but you had a Christian group that kind of took that and tried to Christianize what he experienced.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that was the thing there, because it didn't match up with what he initially said.
Right.
And that got people not believing him, but he wasn't the one that had twisted it around like that.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't really talk about like angels and God, and the book's more about like light orbs and sound frequencies and different things, like that.
Isn't there a movie?
Is there? I don't know.
I think there's a movie or a documentary or something, and that's where it got very Christianized.
Oh, okay.
And so a lot of people started dismissing his experience, and I've never seen it. I haven't read the book, so I don't know off the top of my head. I just remember that he had gotten put into that category, and people were telling me, no, that's not what he experienced. It was kind of taken, you know?
No, I mean, that makes sense. Doesn't that happen with everything? Even not to go back to the UFO thing, but everybody thinks that UFOs are demons or are evil entities. If you go into any of the Facebook forums, I'm out there promoting our stuff, and we'll get probably a handful of messages every couple of weeks of oh, these are demons and you shouldn't be dealing with this stuff, and blah 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 blah. So,
well, a lot of this stuff, the vantage point you're coming from defines what you're looking at, and that's kind of what I'm saying with like the way perception works. So if you're very religious, then anything that is not of a certain caliber is thus demonic. And they just won't look at it any other way, because that's what they've been taught. It makes sense based on what they've been taught. So it's demons, if you haven't been brought up that way, then you look at it in a completely different light.
Right. Well, isn't there this weird thing that I think we all do it when we're kids, and I don't know if you have. I've talked to Maurice about this, but you're in the basement, you're playing whatever, you're having a good time. It's time to go upstairs. You turn off the light, and it gets real creepy and dark. And you're like, and you run up the stairs, and you're like, "There's something behind me." You don't know that there's something behind you, but it's just a feeling that you have.
The dragon's mouth.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's some epigenetic thing that goes back to us being, Neanderthals or Denisovans when we're literally running for our lives, or what that means. Yeah, but. That's what I think Bigfoot is, by the way. I think Bigfoot's some sort of epigenetic memory of maybe Gigantopithecus or some sort of large primate. I don't buy. That's the one thing.
Combination of a lot
when
of
when you talk about ghosts and you talk about aliens and you talk about all this stuff, the one thing to me that I think is the least likely is the Bigfoot thing. For some reason, I've looked at the shows, I've seen what I think
there's a lot of animals out there. Just relax, people. It's
even
just
Scott
it's just a
Walter.
bear.
Even Scott Walter on American on Earth just did one about like some Louisiana version of the Bigfoot, so he did a good job of trying to debunk some of the reasoning behind why people thought that. But yeah, it just seems like this constant thing that keeps coming up that really I've never seen any. So, like UFOs, there's videos, like whether you believe they're a government or not, there's something there. With Bigfoot, I've never seen anything credible.
I saw a man in an ape suit. Turn to the camera real slow.
See, I don't know. I as far as that video goes, I think it's a legit video.
All right, well, I might have to repop that bad boy on. And
you
check
think
it
the
out
one
again.
where the guy that admitted that he was in a monkey suit or whatever?
He never produced the monkey suit. That's the thing. Like it people wanted to hear that, so they believed him, but he never produced a monkey suit, and that suit would have been very advanced. I mean, okay, so he's doing this with no budget, out in the wilderness. At the same time, we're filming Planet of the Apes. Which one looks more real? Oh, the one out in the wilderness with no budget.
Right.
Yeah, that's true, man.
Right down to muscles rippling and things like that. And it's a female Bigfoot, which is not one of those things you would necessarily, like if you were going to make a Bigfoot, would you make a female Bigfoot? especially back in the 60s.
Not in a man's world, I'll tell you that.
Exactly.
In this day and age, it's
No.
a nine non-binary Bigfoot.
I was
okay?
gonna say
That's-
this thing's a
But-
black line, man.
But the thing is, there's so many little things there that suggest that this might have been an actual real encounter. But it also, one of the things you find through all this stuff is the element of the trickster. And that's a great example, because you have a guy who was literally going out to look for Bigfoot, finds him on his first day, gets a film of it, but no one believes it.
Didn't they analyze like the way that it was walking too? Because they like
They said the gait is not a human gait.
okay. Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to go back and check that out.
I know.
because,
I
like,
gotta look at this. Thing.
everything I watched on and I looked at, into that one, it was like, this is bunk, just like that one of the Loch Ness Monster. It was like a children's toy that they made look like some massive, plesiosaurus or whatever.
400 millimeter lens.
and the thing is, the Gimlin film might be fake, but if it's a fake, it's an incredibly well done fake.
Well, the gimbal video was who is it? He's always on Joe Rogan. Mick West. He went to extreme lengths to try to explain why it was some sort of visual artifact. But we just had my buddy Lee Adams on, who's actually stationed on the USS Nimitz and worked on planes and knows about the FLIR radar system and
that
all
wasn't
that
an
stuff.
artifact.
And he's like, no, it's real, whether it's us or outside, comes from another planet or maybe another government. Like my thing with the whole other government thing, if it's from another government, how come they haven't come after us? Obviously we're like the number one target. We're the world police.
Well, it depends on what country it is, but
I'm just saying, if you came up with that, you would use it to your advantage. You would see some sort of boost in something. There would be there's just no way that you would just have that technology and not use it. I don't think that that's possible, especially and with us, it's like the way I think about it too is like, if we have that technology, why haven't we used it? Or maybe we do use it. I don't know, but it just seems like we're so evil in perception compared to the rest of the world. Like we're always looked down upon as we're this and this military superpower. We're always, throwing our weight around. Well, if that's the case, how come we haven't used it? I don't know. That's a good question, but
because we haven't needed to.
Maybe you think that. You think it could just be the fact that everything else that we have is still so superior that it's just this last trick in the bag if need be,
and maybe this is our way of showing it off to our enemies. Look what we got. Even our own people don't know what this is.
Well, that was who's it? Something Jacobson. She was on Joe Rogan, where she's an author. She was talking about how she had interviewed this guy before he died. He was part of the Manhattan Project, and he had Q clearance and all this stuff. And he was told that Stalin, they dropped some UFOs in our airspace, like Roswell or whatever, and that the bodies that were in there were like mentally handicapped people that were surgically altered to look like gray aliens. And that's what he was told, and that's what she reported in her book. But I mean, it's hard to believe people where it's like, check out my book, because she really referenced all of her books. She's got like
she was plugging that thing.
She was plugging on it. She sounded like a 900 sex operator too, like her voice. She had that kind of a voice, but it's just I have a hard time believing people when they're constantly like plugging their own shit. It's just like, you obviously have an agenda. So
yeah. I think Nick Redfern came up with some interesting stuff about Roswell. Being a test craft. I think it was a test craft. I can't remember now. I know Dietrich, what's his first name? I've had him on a couple of times. He tends to be, he was supposedly he was a archiver in some base in San Francisco or something, and they had him destroy all these documents, and he has an eidetic memory. So as he was destroying these documents, he claimed to have just read through them all, and they talk about all this kind of stuff. And it's one of those things where if you listen to him and you check some of the major points he's talking about, he's dead on. You can check, you can find them online. You can say, yep, that's accurate. That's accurate. Whether or not he's connecting the dots right is a completely different question.
Right.
But he says that was a Japanese, that Roswell was a Japanese craft that we captured and were testing using small Japanese people.
Mm,
And they tried to get away and the craft exploded.
that's crazy. So that's weird though, that somebody that was part of, like in that lady's book, this guy had Q clearance, part of the Manhattan Project. I mean, that's some serious shit. And that he was told or was inferred to or whatever, something like a different version of that same story. So that to me, it's like, by the way, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure have you seen Unacknowledged? There's a part where Richard Doty is talking about that exact same thing about how our government. So it's like that guy lies. So I don't know what to believe because he mentions that exact same thing, that we altered people to look like that and put them in these vehicles or whatever. So if he's saying that, and then there's two different versions of that story, it leads me to think, well, is there something to this and everybody's just gotten different versions of it? Or is it this baseline story that sounds good that will get people off the trail? I don't know, but
yeah, it's hard to tell. And a lot of
it's so hard. There's so much shit out there. It's so hard.
So a lot of the people who were involved in this, in the To the Stars, were also part of the Aviary, which was a disinformation group that Greg Bishop talks about and had a connection with information from, and they were literally a disinformation group.
Who out of To the Stars was in that group?
I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm not. I don't
know. The main ones are obviously Tom DeLonge, Luis Elizondo. Luis Elizondo was in the CIA. Maybe it could have been him. Yeah. There's Hal Puthoff, Kit Green. I don't know. There's
I don't remember, but I know at least a couple of them were in the Aviary. It would be something you'd have to have whatchamacallit on to talk about it, because he's the one that wrote the book and everything on it, and Greg Bishop, he's fantastic with that stuff. If you want to get into that, he's the one you want to have on.
Yeah, it's just it's like a riddle, it's like who's telling the truth. And like I like I said, I tend to believe that we just don't know. Like there could be something metaphysical going on that we just don't understand, and that we're pretending to understand, or maybe creating these other storylines. But so that's my thought on it. But I'm open to the idea that it's just us and that there's some grand reason behind that. But then I think about so Chris Mellon, who's part of the Mellon family, why would he, he's part of the Department of Defense, why would he attach himself to this? If it ends up coming out that these people are liars, there's certain people's reputations from some of these old families that have money that I don't think that would associate with that kind of stuff. So maybe I'm wrong, but
the thing is, people have short memories.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these people have played this game again and again, and people continue to believe them.
Right.
I mean, especially nowadays, our culture has such a short memory. If it didn't happen yesterday, we've forgotten all about it.
Oh yeah, it's been on CNN and Fox News, and people. The weird thing, I'll say this about what you're saying, is more than ever right now, I have random people talking to me about, my dad's like, what about this UFO stuff? I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, I watched all these documentaries. He's never been into that kind of shit. He
went down the rabbit hole, man.
He's a very businessman mind, he's day-to-day consciousness. He's not really concerned, but now he's, and there's a lot of people that I know, like work and different people that I've talked to about this kind of stuff that are taking interest with it. So it's like you have this whole group of people right now that are just normal people that aren't into the paranormal, aren't into UFOs, that are taking notice with this kind of a thing. So whether it's false or correct, or maybe there's some truth or whatever, I feel like there's a lot of people waking up to this idea of it, which is interesting, because I don't think that it's been that in the past, right? People poo-pooed it, or you were crazy to believe it, or
different time periods. It comes and goes.
Right.
The subject gets really popular, but now it's probably the first time we've seen it in mainstream news and stuff being taken at least remotely seriously.
Mm-hmm.
But I also don't think it had the effect that everyone expected it to have. When the New York Times article came out, a lot of people didn't notice. It's just kind of like, oh, UFOs are real? Okay.
That is what it was like.
This isn't paradigm shifting at all.
And I think a lot of people know something was going on, and to have it acknowledged, they were just kind of like, yeah, all right,
Right. Well, I mean, it's there's so many different look, there's some bunk people out there too, like the David Wilcox and that kind of stuff. Like I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be honest. I do watch Ancient Aliens because I find it entertaining, and I like watching Graham Hancock and all the megalithic structure stuff.
Yep.
Like that's my favorite shit. Like
There's some
so I
truth
watch it.
sprinkled in there for sure.
Yeah, there is, but then there's a lot of bullshit. And when they start saying things like, "Did aliens build the pyramids?" No, they didn't. We don't know exactly how they were built, but humans built them.
Right. There's no evidence that aliens were involved.
And why would they, if you could fly here from a different galaxy or solar system, you're going to use it's an amazing feat, but it still looks shitty. It's not like sharp, complete, perfect angles or
But it is the only thing that has lasted as long as it has lasted. Like,
correct.
Everything else
they look pretty cool, man.
What's that show that used to be on History Channel? Not History Channel, Discovery Channel. It was like they show you a timeline of like when the Earth, if humans were just to disappear off the Earth tomorrow.
World Without Humans, or
yeah, and it's how many years it takes for skyscrapers to break down. How many years a car takes like 100 years to break down or something, or rust out or something. So it's like they said if we were all to die tomorrow, the only things that would be left standing, is still the Great Pyramids and then also Mount Rushmore.
Was it Rushmore? I thought it was the Hoover Dam.
No, because the Hoover Dam will last a decent amount of time, but the thing about the Hoover Dam is nobody's maintaining it because there's a lot of maintenance that goes involved with it. The longer it goes, the more possible that like cracks build up and then it starts to break through. But the one I heard was the Mount Rushmore.
But yeah, the pyramids would still be there, and
pyramids, yeah.
It's like, so they were built really well in a very specific way.
Yeah.
What do you think about that, though? Like, because I've gone down the rabbit hole with that too. There's the internal ramp theory, which is Jean-Pierre Louboutin, who was like an engineer who did that on the side that came up with the cool theory. You've got the ramp theory, which is that there's this massive ramp and they're constantly
the backbreaker we like to call.
What was that?
I said we like to call that one the backbreaker.
But the problem with that one is you would need more stone to create the actual ramp than would take to build the actual pyramid itself. So it's that one kind of doesn't really make sense to me. But
I suspect that it was built with some type of lost technology, especially the main part of it, because Graham has shown that it looks like it was two different building segments on it, like the really big blocks and then the littler blocks along the top. The little blocks aren't that big of an issue how you would move them. It's the really immense ones being being brought up high, into this place on the pyramid, like the relieving chambers.
Right. And that's heavy as granite in there too. And how did they get that in there? Like that's Aswan's not close to Aswan, where they got all that red granites. You'd have to take a boat, and then if you I know that there's that, what's it called, there's the papyrus they found. I forget the guy's name. He was like an ancient.
Bring some of the smaller blocks up,
Right. So I don't know if they could do that with the granite though, because that was limestone, sandstone. I think that granite's obviously a lot heavier.
Yeah, and then there's bigger things around the world, bigger blocks than the ones that put in. Look at Baalbek, for instance.
Oh yeah.
How did they move those into place? Unless, and the thing is, I don't think you would work with blocks that big unless you had a methodology for moving them fairly easily.
Mm-hmm.
And we think in that brute strength sort of thing, it's like, oh, we just got to get a bigger crane and we could move it. And it might be something like anti-gravity. They may have sound technology that they could apply to a block to make it lose weight.
Right.
And they could just move it into place and then remove the sound from it, and it drops into place. We know we can levitate things with sound, but we're just at the infancy of that type of technology. What if a different culture went that way first instead of the way we went?
Yeah, I think about that. I also think about what if the conditions on Earth were different? Like, what if our gravity was altered from some sort of...
Sure, yeah.
What's the magnetic, they always talk about the magnetic shift or the magnetic flip, like what if there's some sort of difference in gravity, having to do with that? Or what if the sun, you were talking about Robert Schoch earlier, the sun's solar, the flares causing, the mass coronal ejections and that kind of stuff. And that affects our magnetic field on Earth. So,
Mhm.
who knows? There's so many different things you could go with that. I don't think we'll ever know, in my opinion. I don't think we'll ever know exactly how the pyramids were built. Maybe something,
Unless we replicate the technology.
yeah, and that
True.
could be the case. We know how other things are like obelisks. There's still obelisks that are still in the ground, half constructed. And they know they use dolomite rocks to like bash them out, and there's a certain technique to cut them out. It's not kind of similar to how they cut the Easter Island moai from
Right,
the volcanic rock. They used rocks to bash out the edges, and then get it out that way. But
Especially with the Great Pyramid and stuff, and some of the stuff in South America, you see evidence of machining on them.
Mhm.
That it wasn't bashed out with rocks. It looks like, and I think I don't remember whose book it was in. They were saying that the way the drilling was done, like they compared it to other drills we have now, and they said the only drill that matches up with the type of drilling they were seeing was a sonic drill.
was it like Chris Dunn, maybe? The
I haven't read any Chris Dunn stuff. I know Chris Dunn stuff, but I haven't read his books. It was in
Yeah.
someone. I don't remember whose book it was. Maybe it was Andrew Collins, actually.
could be.
Well, they found a bunch of like ancient gears and stuff that they have no clue how old they are. So
Yeah, what's that? The Greek antith. Yeah, I can't even.
Antikythera
Yeah,
device.
Antikythera. I can't even pronounce it.
Yeah,
But
that's a very advanced cosmic computer,
right.
and that didn't just pop out of nowhere. If that existed in that form, at that point, there had to be predecessors to it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So like this technology existed, and we only found one ever.
Right.
So how much other stuff out there have we not found? We don't consider the fact that we're only finding like 1% of what's out there. So
Well,
much of the other stuff is lost.
Well, you got the oceans covering, you've got Sundaland, which was covered. You've got Dodgerland, which, Sundaland connected the bottom of Indonesia to the top part of Australia. And you
Mhm.
had Dodgerland, which was Great Britain connected to the rest of Europe.
Right.
Mhm.
And you've got all these land bridge in the Bering Land Bridge and all that stuff. So you've got these land bridges, and I don't know how much excavations gone where we know that there was once land in those areas. I think that those are places we need to be looking at for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and that's what Graham's been saying. I mean, the sea water rose 300 feet since the Ice Age.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a lot of land underwater, and that's where people were. They were along the shores.
One of your videos that I first got into there was like a video. You normally don't do videos. You normally do your show. There is no video.
I do videos of him in person with someone.
But you had one. You have John Anthony West and Laird Scranton in the same room. What was that like? Because I mean, those are two guys that are super into symbology and ancient Egypt and ancient civilizations. What was that like meeting John Anthony and talking with him face to face?
It was awesome. It really was. He was just an incredible individual. I had Laird on a couple of times, and they both lived out by Albany, about 4 hours from me. And I said to Laird, I said, I'd really like to, have John Anthony West on sometime. I'm like, it'd be even cooler if we could do it in person. And Laird said, because Laird was good friends with John, he said, I'll ask him. And then he gets back to me. He's like, so he wants to know if you want to come to his house for a barbecue. And I was like, yeah, that would be a big yes. Yes, that would be awesome. And so we went out there, and he cooked us food, and we hung out for a while, and then we did that interview, and then we hung out for a bit afterwards, and I got to pick his brain about things. And he was just such an incredibly nice guy. He had this huge room. I mean, you could see some of it in the video. Huge. Actually, I think we toured around at the end of the video.
Yeah.
I mean, just lined with books everywhere.
Right.
Some of his family was there. They were all awesome. It was just a fantastic experience.
No, I mean that's
the gold standard.
Well,
Yeah.
and you look at it like we just got into this. That's somebody that I would have loved to have interviewed, but it's just obviously passing with time and different timelines and different stuff. But there's enough information of his out there where obviously his books, and then you've got, appearance on your shows, other podcasts. I think he was on Joe Rogan once.
I
Yeah,
believe
he cemented his place in time. That's for sure.
Yeah, and Magical Egypt, obviously, which is an amazing series. But yeah, I mean, all that stuff is just super fascinating to me. See, I tend to be more interested in the ancient civilization stuff, just because, as opposed
It's
to, let's
there,
say,
you know what happened.
UFOs or ghosts. Yeah, there's physical material. There's a lot of questions surrounding it. You can't just have somebody radiocarbon data rock. Like there's a lot that goes into looking into this stuff. And I think for me, we've always had, at least I have had, an affinity for ancient Egypt. I mean, we grew up with it in our house. Our grandfather was kind of a visionary inventor, and he invented some technology stuff, like some of the first door sensors that would open using microwaves, as opposed to now it's visual sensors and stuff like that. But he wrote down a lot of his meditation techniques, which I use to this day, and there's a lot of his notes and stuff that have been preserved. And he had a lot of these huge glass panes with all these hieroglyphics and cartouches that have secret meanings and all this kind of stuff that's in my one uncle's house. And he was just a very cool guy in that way. And unfortunately, he passed away when we were both 5 years old. But I had this relationship with him when I was young, where I was, when I was like 3, 4, and 5, I was like super into Jacques Cousteau. Like that was my favorite dude. And I would always like draw pictures of Jacques Cousteau and scuba tanks and all that stuff, and he would help me. So we had this like kind of a bond thing going on. But it's just weird that that's kind of also part of the catalyst of us getting into this. I had like a spiritual awakening with my mother going through breast cancer treatment. She's fine now, but at the time it was super scary, and it kind of woke me back up. Like something in me snapped, where I went from just living my day-to-day life to I don't know, it was like a calling, if you will. So, and then I started getting into the ancient Egypt stuff, the Graham Hancock stuff, and all that stuff was there. So I felt like I feel like I have some sort of connection to ancient Egypt in some weird way. But that being said, my favorite megalithic structure to look at is obviously Gobekli Tepe, not only just because of the age, but the importance of it. What are your thoughts on Gobekli Tepe? Like, do you have any ideas, or like you said, you picked John Anthony West's brain? Has anybody you've talked to kind of said something that's clicked with you with that? Or
that's a really mysterious structure to me, because it was buried in sections. Laird Scranton thinks it was a teaching tool, and that they would bury it and start over to teach different things, and that once it was done, they buried it. And he's shown connections, with the Dogon and different sites around the world, which is interesting. Andrew Collins' stuff is interesting on it. But I definitely think it's evidence of an ancient civilization with some knowledge they needed to share in some way, shape, or form. Whether that was meant for us now, I don't know. It may have been a way of teaching that knowledge to people who didn't have it then after a cataclysm. Or even knowing a cataclysm was coming, because they had to have, if they were advanced enough, they had to know things were going bad. Whatever the cause of the end of the last ice age, there were probably signs that things were not going to be so good for a while.
No, I agree with all that. Do you think, though, I mean, like you said, actually, what Laird's book was at Point of Origin, that's the one on Gobekli Tepe. But when we had him on, we talked about the different symbolism from the different parts of the world that can be found there. Like there is I think we pulled up a picture. There's a similar fox that's on one of the T-pillars that's also on one of the Dogon altars, I believe, or the dog. I forget what it was. But and then the other one was, there's this symbol where it's like 2 half circles with a line in between them, which can also be found in Aboriginal artwork and on some of their stuff. And there's a couple other ones too, but it's just the vulture, like from the vulture stone. It kind of looks like the Make bird cult symbolism found on Easter Island too. So there's a lot of like weird stuff. And I know Robert Schoch's kind of the only one that's really been pushing the Easter Island timeline way back to, around the time of Gobekli Tepe. But what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that there was maybe some like meeting place or, like general center or epicenter or something like that?
Very well could have been, yeah. It's such an odd place that we have zero information on. I mean, anything we say is just guesswork at this point. I mean, there's obvious connections to other places, but I think that's because we had a worldwide culture at one point.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Graham does a good job in his new book of showing how these like, North American cultures and Egypt have connections, but they're different enough to say they weren't sharing information. They
Right.
come from something further back and have slowly modified as time went forward, which is what you would expect to see. But they're similar enough in certain points that a master culture had to be back there somewhere, a mother culture that all of these groups sprang from.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
there's weird anomalies too. I think they found, we're both from Michigan, but I think they found Michigan copper in Egypt.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So I
There
mean,
was-
it's a very specific, pure type of copper too. It's not like
Yep.
something that can be found, just anywhere. And I know there's speculation too, like the Egyptians used to trade with people. Look, I also read the academic stuff, like the Oxford book on ancient Egypt, the what are those called? The courses in history or whatever. I don't know, the great courses or whatever. There's one with Bob Breer, who's an Egyptologist. So I read the academic stuff too, and I think that there's even some of their stuff can be alluded to previous, more ancient stuff than what's taken at taught in schools and stuff like that nowadays. But I just think that if you look at it, who knows what's going on? It could have been like the Greeks or the Minoans coming to America, or the Vikings, getting resources, going back, trading, or it could have been the Egyptians. They had boats too. They could have been sailing over, what's that? Thor Heyerdahl proved that you could float from the coast of Chile to Easter Island on just a raft made out of the materials found along, the beach and the forest there. So, I mean, who knows?
Well, David Hatcher Childress liked to say, the oceans are freeways, not obstacles.
Mhm.
And I don't
Yeah.
remember who he got it from, but that's very true. I mean, all you had to do is make a
Great
boat,
quote.
go right across,
Yeah, that's awesome.
And we just assume our ancestors were dumb.
Yeah,
Right.
I know, it's crazy.
Well, that's what most of the academics, not that I don't think they think them as dumb. It's just, what does John Anthony say? It's the Church of Progress. It's just
Yeah.
that we've always gotten smarter. We've always gotten better. But I think that, and then maybe that's my affinity with the ancient Egyptian stuff, is I feel like they understood consciousness better than we understand consciousness.
Oh yeah, almost definitely. I think a lot of the ancient cultures did, because they included that into the world. They didn't separate it out.
Right, it's
Mhm.
science and art and religion were all one thing.
And you have this belief now that things always start primitive and become more and more advanced, and there's nothing that interrupts that. So they take catastrophe out of that. I mean, we had a long period prior to the end of the last ice age that an advanced culture could have been thriving.
Mhm.
And we have, maps with Antarctica without ice.
Mhm.
We have various out of place artifacts that don't make any sense. You have this lineage of information that seems to spread around the world that there's no direct connection between cultures for. All of this points to an ancient civilization that was decently advanced, at least seafaring, if nothing else. And they don't accept that, because that means an advanced culture was wiped off the face of the planet almost
Right.
completely. And I think in some cases that just scares people,
True.
because it could happen to them, it could happen to us. And instead of saying we should be more prepared, they just say, well, it didn't happen.
Well, that's just it. Shouldn't that scare us into creating some sort of technology to prevent it from happening again? Like, we're still not that close from being able to figure out if an asteroid or comet or whatever is headed toward. I think if a comet's headed toward us, we're fucked, honestly.
There's a
But-
lot of factors though, because people that have produced books and stuff on these subjects, they don't want to have to retract their shit. So
Well,
it's
that's
like a bunch of things all combined that everyone's just wanted to deny it.
Uniformitarianism.
Yeah, but we have evidence of massive solar flares.
Mhm.
This is something we should be protecting our power grids from, because one of them could wipe out everything, and if we lose our power grids, our civilization is going to collapse.
Mhm.
And it's not a big deal to go through and protect it, so this wouldn't happen. But Congress has no interest in doing it.
Hmm.
They're not being paid by the right people, clearly, that want to preserve our power grid.
Well, that's the Graham Hancock theory too, that if all this shit does go down, it's the hunter-gatherers living in the Amazon. It's
Yeah,
the
yeah.
tribal people around the world that are going to thrive because, and that's what the premise of his book is that those are the people that thrived when this happened before.
Yeah.
There could have been some crazy Atlantis or whatever, and then there was the people living in the forest like we still have to this day. And those are the people that, again, it keeps resetting, and those are the people that are always there.
Yeah, and you may have had a small pocket of survivors. This may have been what the Anunnaki were.
Mm-hmm.
But you look at Laird Scranton's stuff too, and he's talking about how these civilizers were not from here. They weren't from, people will say, well, they were from Sirius. But what the Dogon actually say is that they were spiritual beings.
Or the non-material, I think is, yeah.
And that they could only communicate with for so long with certain people and things like this that they were trying to teach us. And he has the interpretation that we live in a imperfect world where we can affect change, but we don't have perfect knowledge. And they exist in a perfect world where they have perfect knowledge, but they can't affect change.
Right.
And so they're trying to communicate with us to help us move things in the right direction.
No, absolutely. And actually, yeah, he always puts these diagrams on Facebook and stuff like that too. I enjoy his ancient civilization posts, but there's this one where it's kind of shows this like counterbalance that we keep reaching this point where we meet kind of in the middle, and we're close to the non-material and the material's closest it's ever been to each other, but then it's this cycle that happens and then it veers back away from each other.
Yeah.
So I find that interesting, and that that's an interesting way to look at it too, because if you do believe in the metaphysical, looking for symbology and people thinking along those lines back then could yield some sort of answers.
The first person I talked to, I didn't technically do it on this show, I did it on my music show, was Walter Cruttenton. And that was kind of my test run. Like, can I do this? Can I do an intelligent interview about this stuff? Do I know enough? Or is it, because I wasn't talking to people who knew more than me. I was talking to people who knew less than me generally, friends and so forth. So I was like, I need to test this and make sure I'm not going to sound like an idiot, that I actually know the stuff I think I know. And Walter agreed to come on. So I just did it on the music show. We did like an hour and a half with music interspersed. And Walter's book, The Lost Star of Myth and Time, is excellent. And it talks about how we may exist in a binary star system. And that star may be far out there. It may be a brown dwarf. He leans toward it being Sirius. And this would explain the precession of the equinoxes. There's a lot of data that lines up very neatly if that's the case. But he also suggests that as that celestial influence moves closer to us, as Sirius comes closer to us, it changes our consciousness. And it allows us access to things we're not normally accessing like now. I mean, because now we're just starting to move toward it. So we're just coming out of the dark ages. And you see this idea of a cyclic culture, a cyclic golden age to dark age type of thing in a lot of different cultures.
Yeah.
One of the things Robert Schoch found is that in researching psi, people got better results in laboratories doing psi when there was high solar activity.
That's interesting.
And the way he put it is, if these people are faking it, it would take a conspiracy spanning a century to only get really good results while there's high solar activity.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, back to what you were saying too, don't they know for sure that there's something pulling on, I believe it's Uranus and Neptune's orbit, like some massive body that they haven't detected yet, but they know it's there?
Yep. And so, like, if by Sirius moving closer to us, we become more spiritual or have more access to things like psi, this may also help explain some of these large structures that were built at a time when maybe we had access to different abilities than we do now, or we could perceive the universe in a completely different way than we do now.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I love that stuff. That's sweet.
Do you think that the whole consciousness thing, do you think that like planets and the stars, do you think that celestial bodies are conscious? Because I know that's been a growing thing. I've seen more and more people, even some academics, talking about how these bodies are, there's possibly some level of consciousness. And then you've got like Rupert Sheldrake's morphic resonance theory that some inanimate objects or non-biological objects have some sort of consciousness or memory.
Yeah, I think I think consciousness is like kind of the root of our existence.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's a consciousness there. It's not like ours at all. It's
Right.
something we would recognize compared to ours, but I think there is some level of consciousness there in everything. I mean, you think about it. I mean, we all exist in different levels of consciousness at all times. Our cells may have very rudimentary forms of consciousness that move them forward to do what they're supposed to do, and then it builds into us. But then when we get in groups, we can almost have group consciousnesses, if we're all focused on the same thing, like in a crowd or something.
Mm-hmm.
I think consciousness exists on a lot of different levels, and I think even internally to us, we have multiple levels of consciousness that we can we can move between and focus on at different times in our existence.
Well said.
Yeah, I mean it's weird to think about. I mean, I've been trying to think about sleep too in that way. Like, is sleep? I don't think sleep's separate from our day-to-day I'm sorry. I think it is separate, and in the sense that I think sleep's just a different form of consciousness. You
Yeah.
know, and that I've been getting into that more and more too. That line of thinking, because we all think that sleeping's just what our brain. I mean, the academic says it's just our brain solving problems while our body's functioning on like a low level kind of a thing. So it's in like what's it called, like standby mode or something like
Right.
that.
But they don't know. That's the thing.
Yeah.
They don't know.
They're basing that on their beliefs.
Right. They claim to know, but they don't know.
I mean, I've had tons of precognitive dreams. So, I mean, stuff that's completely undeniably precognitive, sometimes years in advance. How is that my brain working out problems,
Do you
If it was-
meditate?
I do meditate sometimes, not as much as I used to, just for lack of time.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that, our dream worlds are much more real than we realize. There may be there may be out of body experiences involved. There may be literally connections to other worlds that we just don't remember when we're here. We're thinking on a completely different level of consciousness, which is why so many people don't remember their dreams, or even those of us who do only remember bits of them.
Well, that's what they say. A lot of people with those out of body experiences, they all say that it's realer than real when they're in that realm.
Yeah, say near death. That's the one thing, like near death and DMT I found. I don't think they're the same thing, but we were talking about earlier. But I do think that's something you hear both of the people that have experienced those say. And I've actually talked to people that have experienced both near-death experiences and have smoked DMT or had done ayahuasca, where they say even though they're different experiences, the feeling is more real than real.
Yeah. Like we're in the illusion here.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
This is the dream.
Well, we're living the dream, that's for sure.
It's a very persistent dream.
Yeah.
What do you think about like sleep paralysis and stuff? Because I think that when people, you were talking about abductions earlier, I think when people feel like they're being abducted or something like that, I think a lot of it, I've only had it one time, and I was about to fall asleep during a nap. So I was kind of more conscious than somebody that was maybe about to fall asleep. And it was this feeling that somebody's pulling me back into the chair, and this white light floods over me. I have no control over what's going on. I was tired too. That was the other thing. I had not slept the night before really at all. And I could see where if more of the dream element was introduced into my experience that I had, I could see somebody believing that they were either being abducted by aliens, or what's it called, like old hag syndrome, or something like that.
And I think again that's an altered state, where you're conscious even though your body's asleep, and it can create all kinds of stuff. I've had so much sleep paralysis in my life, it's ridiculous. And it's one of the few things that creeps me out when I'm in a sleep paralysis state. Like normally the stuff doesn't, the weird stuff doesn't bother me at all. I'll go toward it rather than away from it. It's like, what's that weird noise? Let's go find out, you know?
Right.
When I'm in sleep paralysis is when I can get freaked out by stuff. And like there have been times where I'm like trapped in a loop where I'll like think I'm awake and then realize that things aren't right. And I'll be like, I'm still asleep. And then I'll wake up and be like, okay. And like at one point, like every time I looked at the clock, instead of numbers, there were symbols. And I went, I'm still asleep. Damn it. You know?
Right. No, I mean,
kept trying to wake up and I kept cycling through this same thing. And I'm like, all right, I got to like move my body or something to break out of this.
you should have our buddy on your show, Lee Adams. He runs this webpage called Tail Eaters. He also started a social media platform called DMT World that's specifically devoted to psychedelics, but he's all about out-of-body stuff, and he's had a lot of out-of-body experiences. He's had really bad sleep paralysis where he talks about the way he got over it was, you know, and he's into Jung and psychology and all that stuff too, but I think he got rid of his sleep paralysis by going at this entity. It was like some shadowy dark entity, and he swallowed the entity, and once he swallowed the entity, he was no longer fearful, and I think that he doesn't really have those issues anymore. But I found that interesting because he's a pretty you know, pretty open-minded person, but he's still kind of skeptical. You know, he doesn't really just believe in nonsense.
My co-host Ren has almost an identical situation where he was out of body and there was something there bothering him or attacking him or something, and he like changed himself into a werewolf and ate the thing.
Oh, that's yeah. I mean that, and I guess he said something about Jung's work where Carl Jung talks about something along those lines where it's like you have to confront that part of it, you know, or to deal with that aspect of your subconscious or something along those lines.
And the thing with all the paranormal stuff is that we don't know what we are. Like I said, we don't know what reality is. We don't know what we are. We don't know what we're capable of. So, like, one of the things I track through all this stuff, almost every type of phenomena involves poltergeists. Now, you know, there are some people who say, well, that's a ghost, but I don't necessarily I think ghosts might be able to use that energy, or spirits might be able to use that energy, but basically that energy comes from us. Poltergeist energy originates with us. So we may be creating a lot of these phenomena around us. Different people creating different things because they're in different places. Like if you're in a house, it's a ghost. If you're out in the woods, it's a Bigfoot, but it's still poltergeist activity coming from us. And some people will get upset with that and they'll say, so you're saying none of this stuff is real? And it's like, no, I'm saying we're way more powerful than we have any concept of.
Sure.
You know, if we can manipulate reality like that, if we learn to control it, that would be incredible. And again, maybe this is something the ancients could do. Maybe they could manipulate things like psi and move large blocks easily.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's that one. I don't know. I'll admit, we have never really done. We did one episode on the Mothman because in high school we saw the Mothman prophecies, and then I ended up reading the book. And there's something about that story that Maurice and I, we went to see it. We got all high before, and we went to go see it, and we were almost like scared shitless afterwards, like what the fuck is going on with this thing?
It touched us. That's to say the least.
So we did an episode trying to figure out what it might have been, and there's a lot of, at the time they were doing MK Ultra stuff in that area, so we theorized maybe these people were being dosed, or something along those.
But you're still getting poltergeist activity, UFO activity,
right.
Cryptids. You're seeing just a host of different things all mixed together in that one area. So that might have been part of it. It could have been. It could also be that in certain areas the Earth puts out certain energy fields that affect us.
Yeah.
Or cosmic influences come in. I mean, why is some place like Skinwalker Ranch so active?
Right.
And it might be because there's something in the ground or something about the planet right there that affects us.
So do you think that there's something? I know there's a documentary. Who is it? Jeremy Corbell. We did a review of the Bob Lazar documentary, but I don't think that I've seen. I know I haven't seen any of the Skinwalker one. Have you seen anything? Like what?
Yeah. We did a roundtable on it, and it was pretty much all of us were very disappointed with it.
Okay.
The book is fantastic.
Okay.
George Knapp and I forget the other author. I mean, they did an incredible job documenting this stuff. And the documentary, if you know nothing about it, the documentary is probably fine.
Okay.
But after all these years, it's like, okay, we're going to get some new information about the, Skinwalker Ranch. And it's like, oh, no. We're going to get a lot of the same stories, sometimes told third hand by people on camera. And it's just kind of like this. I just feel like I wasted my time on this,
Right. I know people felt that way about the Bob Lazar. I thought if you watched the Joe Rogan Bob Lazar interview and you also watched the documentary, I think it's a nice tandem because you can kind of get the full picture. I don't need to hear Mickey Rourke mumble in the background. Like that was the one thing about what are they hiding up there? Like that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, so like the ghost thing to me, the ghost and paranormal thing in that sense, I don't know too much about. Maybe we'll do stuff on the future about it. I just see stuff on like the Travel Channel, and it just looks,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well,
I
that's
mean, and maybe
all hyped up and sensational.
when I listen to your show, that's the most realistic take I usually hear on it. You know what I'm saying? Because you're still being skeptical, but you're still talking about crazy shit. When I watch it on TV, there's like, what was that over there? It's like you're in the dark. You're in, you're in an abandoned building that's falling apart. Of course, you're gonna hear shit. That's
Well, and the thing like with ghosts, I mean, a lot of these ghost hunting shows are searching for evidence, but even if you get something really genuine on film or recorded or what, it still doesn't tell us what we're dealing with.
right.
So like an EVP, okay, so I've heard some really good EVPs, and I've known personally ghost hunters who have gotten incredible EVPs. And I sit there and I go, okay, so is this EVP picking something up from the environment? Is there a spirit responsible? Or are we somehow projecting onto these recorders again from ourselves because we're, because it seems like the people who get EVPs get more and more as they keep doing it. And it's almost like that seems like it's us developing this unconscious skill
Right.
to project sound onto a recorder.
No, that's an interesting way to
crazy.
think about it. I never really thought about that because our mind is a powerful tool, and as I mentioned before, you can scare yourself into anything. You can make yourself think anything, and I know, well, Maurice is a professional photographer. I know he's caught some interesting orbs and artifacts on some of his pictures, but again, like what is that? Is
Yeah, it's not proof of ghosts. You can prove, you can suggest there's something anomalous going on, but you can't prove what that anomalous thing is. A photograph isn't enough. You could get a great photo of a UFO, but it doesn't prove what it is, where it came from, who built it, or anything else.
right.
Just that you got a good picture of a UFO. I mean, there are some really convincing pictures of UFOs out there. Jeff Ritzman is one of the people who will analyze these photos, and he's very skeptical of most of them. And there's been a couple where he's like, this one's not fake. He's like, and here's why. And he'll show you the different things. He goes, I don't know what it is. It's a craft of some sort, but it doesn't tell us anything other than this is a real photograph.
I have a weird story about that. So hang around after we go off air and I'll tell you about it. I don't want to talk about it on here.
Right.
Some weird shit happened, and I don't want to push the
Scare our
boundary.
audience.
But but the last thing I want to touch on before we cut out of here is magic. And you talk a lot about magic and the occult stuff and tarot card readings and all that. That's again something that I think can be interpreted different ways. I read the book. I think the best book I've read in the last couple years, besides like the ancient history, Graham Hancock kind of stuff, is Real Magic by Dean Radin, and the research that he does. For some reason that book just the philosophy stories he has in there and all the ancient stuff. I love that book a lot. But my theory on magic is that, my dad would always say this thing: if you write it down on paper, your daily, list of things to do, you're more likely to do it. It like binds you to that thing. And if you look at like what a modern day written law is, or a code or something like that, it has an attachment to it. So if I get a restraining order, you can't come near me, it's just a written piece of paper. Most people abide by it though, so like that's my theory on what kind of magic is our understanding of language and communication, and that kind of stuff. But I know you probably have a little bit of a different take. So what's your take on the subject?
I like the way Crowley would phrase it, that magic is affecting your environment. So really, really low magic is reaching over and picking up a can because you're affecting your environment. And as you go up the scale, you get to the point where you're using, mental facilities to cause things to happen on a larger scale. And this ties into the exact stuff that I was saying, like with poltergeist phenomena and stuff like that, except we're actively trying to control it. So basically, we're exhibiting psi abilities. We're trying to influence the world around us. We're trying to control our own minds to create certain realities, but we don't quite have it down yet. Magic's one of those things that sort of works if you do it right. It doesn't work for everyone, doesn't work every time, because we don't totally understand what it is. But I think the general idea is the same as a lot of this other stuff, where we are way more powerful than we realize. And I don't think it necessarily relies on other entities, other intelligences. They may be out there, but there's no way to know what we're creating with our mind and what is coming from the outside. There's no easy way to tell, because really it's indiscernible. So if we believe we're contacting this spirit, how do we know we're not creating that spirit on an unconscious level? Anytime
That's an interesting way to look at it. Yeah.
And anytime we manipulate reality, you can get fairly good at it, but we still don't understand exactly what's going on. It still doesn't tell us what reality is. Anyone who's worked with magic successfully will have absolutely no doubt that it works, because it goes way beyond coincidence, but it still doesn't tell us how we're actually doing it, other than focusing our subconscious mind on something. And that was actually that was the thing that really won me over on the Seth material. Crowley would always say, beware lust for result. And so that meant that if you did a magical ritual, you were supposed to forget about it. So you do it, you forget it, you move on, and then you should see the effects of it. But if you keep it in your mind, it won't happen. And I thought that was weird, because going into it, I thought, well, wouldn't you want to focus on the thing you want to happen? Like, wouldn't more focus make it happen? And that, it confused me. I was like, I don't understand why that's the case. And in reading the Seth material, Seth talks about the way we create reality. And he says it's not our conscious minds, but our unconscious minds, which works in symbols. And he wasn't specifically talking about magic, but it suddenly occurred to me that he just described why lust for result is a problem. As long as that stuff is in your conscious mind, it doesn't get to your subconscious. The reason you use symbols and stuff in magic is because that's the language of the unconscious. So if you do it and then forget about it and let it drop down to your unconscious, that's your best chance of your unconscious then manifesting what you wanted to happen.
I mean, I absolutely believe that, especially from like I mentioned earlier, I have OCD. So my fears and anxieties, when I constantly think about them, present themselves more often. It's almost like the law of attraction, but in a negative way.
Yeah.
And when I'm more calm and I'm more, vigilant of that situation, is usually when I can control that, so I can identify with what you just said totally. And I agree to a certain extent. And I think that our subconscious mind is so much more powerful than we give credit to. We talk about consciousness all the time, but what about the subconscious, And I think that even if we were to figure out what consciousness is, let's say from a scientific or analytic standpoint, it still doesn't answer how the subconscious would affect our day-to-day consciousness, or the history or whatever. So I think that that's definitely something that needs to be researched more, for sure.
It's like consciousness is this little boat sitting on a vast ocean of the subconscious.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
And that great ocean can move things. The little boat can't move things that easily, but that big ocean can definitely affect things.
Right. Yeah, the boat's just the observer. It's not really pulling any strings.
Right. I mean, it can lift that can off the counter, but that's
Right.
Yeah.
It's kind of limited in what it can actually do as far as the whole goes. And when you look at paranormal stuff in general, it could be that there's other intelligences out there, but it almost doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it works. It doesn't matter whether you're interacting with something else or some deeper part of yourself.
Right.
And it also seems to respond, like you were just saying, with the negativity. A lot of people have frightening encounters with the paranormal, but if you don't approach it from fear, it doesn't give you those frightening encounters.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like it's responding to you. So at least some part of it, whether it be external to us or not, some part of it is being affected by how we perceive it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think what's your biggest takeaway from doing this show? Like what's one truth that you feel like you can hang your hat on from doing your show that maybe you didn't believe in before, or maybe there's a lot more to it than you previously thought, or something along those lines?
That's a really good question. I think I'm more open to how generalized some of this stuff is, but I think we're asking the wrong questions. I think we're looking at it wrong. We're making too many assumptions, and we need to step back and take a better look at this stuff, especially with like the paranormal stuff, because UFO people think the ghost people are crazy, and the ghost people think the Bigfoot people are crazy, and vice versa. And instead of just going, like my co-host Timothy Renner will, research a Bigfoot sighting, and he'll go, "So did you see any lights in that area around the same time?" And the person will be like, "I did," and it's not something that Bigfoot hunters look for.
Right.
So you ask a Bigfoot hunter, do you get UFO reports or light reports around the time that these happen? And they're like, "Oh, we don't ask those questions."
What if that was the case? What if Bigfoot's coming here and we just,
Well, but
it's some Neanderthal or Denisovan or even a Gigantopithecus thing that evolved on some other planet or some other dimension and shooting in and out,
and whereas all those things are possible, I suspect what the thing is, whatever it is, we're dealing with something that is similar across the board.
Right.
It may have, there may be reasons it appears differently, or it may just, a light in a house is a ghost, and a light in the forest must be a Bigfoot or something, or an elf or something like that. A light in the sky is an alien, but they're all lights. Lights are one of those things you see across the board. So why is light phenomena something that follows all these odd things? Especially if Bigfoot's just flesh and blood, we shouldn't be seeing light phenomena associated with Bigfoot. We shouldn't see footprints that end in the middle of fields with no obvious exit. These things appear and disappear like phantoms, but they leave physical impressions. UFOs do the same thing. A lot of times UFOs just disappear. They don't fly off into space, and they leave physical evidence. But none of the physical evidence is enough to prove the reality of these things.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird. Like I said, I keep going back to consciousness because, and I've said this a million times, but like, there's no real good, other than the cockpit videos and maybe a couple photos. Most of the stuff you see online, most of the stuff you see on YouTube is complete garbage having to do with like the UFO stuff. I have a theory that obviously when you operate a camera, it's a lot different. You're collecting photons and stuff like that. Same thing we do with our eyes. But our eye, it's the way our brain works isn't just our eyes, it's perception. We're taking in data, it's being shifted upside down through our optical nerve, it's sent into our brain and being interpreted in this supercomputer that we can't even recreate with the technology that we have. So this idea that I think it's, when you talk about UFOs, like you said, Bigfoot, maybe it's the same thing. I know, who was it, Jacques Vallée, ideas that they're, Passport to Magnolia, these different things are all the same thing. They're just putting on different masks.
Right.
Maybe if you're studying UFOs, whatever this metaphysical thing is more likely to come to you as UFO, or if you're studying Bigfoot, maybe the Bigfoot's more likely to come to you that way. I don't know. But I think the weird thing though is, like we were talking about earlier, DMT, it's not something that it is a thing that happens within your brain chemistry, but these people have the feeling of more real than real, and they're also talking to entities. It's not like you can't bring it back in the sense that if you saw an alien in the woods, somebody else saw it too, you have that shared actual visual perception of this thing. It's this thing where you go to this alternate reality and experience this amazing thing, and there's no way out of it. It's not something that you're controlling. It's out of your control. So I think that that's an interesting way to look at when people see stuff in day-to-day consciousness, you're probably seeing like a portion or a fragment of what's actually there because you just can't perceive that thing. But when you go into these it's near-death experience or the DMT realm or whatever it is, you have almost full access to this other world and no access to the other world,
Yeah. Well, and it's not just that our brain interprets the stuff we see, but it actually actively filters out 95% of it.
Right.
It says this data is not important. You don't need to see this. So we don't even know it's there. Which can also be why some people will have an experience, see something while someone standing right next to them sees nothing. Because one person's brain goes, that's important. The other person goes, I don't see that.
Right.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Our perceptions are so limited. Most people have very little conception just how limited our perceptions are and how much stuff that we literally is beyond the realm of our senses to pick up.
Yeah.
How much more reality is out there that we haven't even detected yet with machines.
Well, the universe, 95% of the universe is made up of dark matter and dark energy. We don't know what it is, Even the smartest people.
I think that's wrong. I think that if there was dark matter and dark energy, we would have found it by now. And when you listen to physics to the physicists actually researching this stuff, a lot of them have given up. They're like, it's not a thing.
Well, everything's at a standstill right now between quantum physics and the theory of relativity. There's no bridge or cohesion there.
Well, that's it. And I think the dark matter thing is going to fail eventually. There's literally no evidence for it other than theoretical. Like they think it should exist, but they can't find it. So,
well, Vera Rubin's the one that discovered it, and it's the stuff that propels spiral galaxies. Like it's the darkness in between the arms that you see in the spiral galaxy. But what is it? I don't know.
And the electric universe theory actually can explain that and replicate it in a lab.
Right. And that would probably, Tesla, all the stuff he was doing. Obviously, it was all electricity based, and
I think electrical stuff plays a big part. Like the things that I've come to at this point, the three commonalities you find in weird experiences are electricity, light, and poltergeist phenomena.
Mm.
And light could be associated with electrical phenomena as well. And as well, poltergeist stuff might be connected to electrical impulses. So, electricity may be the key to a lot of stuff that we simply don't understand. But if you look into the electric universe theory, they have very sufficiently explained a lot of stuff that's still a mystery to cosmology and astrophysics and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But it gets marginalized. It's not accepted, and it's not accepted because it's failed. It's not accepted because it doesn't fit the current paradigm.
Oh, absolutely. I've looked into it a little bit. I got to do more research on it. And obviously, I know all the stuff with Robert Schoch and the solar-induced dark age and all that stuff's based on that kind of thinking. But I got to look into that more too, because I know that they're, like you're saying, I've seen stuff on it. I'm like, that makes a lot of sense. I just haven't really delved deep into it yet. But yeah, man, weird stuff. You're the title for your show is perfect. Where did the road go? Because it's where are we going? Why are we here? Like those are the greatest questions.
And paving new paths.
Yeah.
By asking better questions.
Yeah. I think you do that. And I think that on your show you do a good job too. You've evolved, if you watch some of your older episodes or listen to your older episodes to the ones more modern times, your views evolve too. So it's not like you're going down the same road. You're like you just said, you're creating new paths for yourself, new thinking, new ideas. You do ask good questions. And I think that's why, I think your numbers don't reflect how good your show is in terms of what you're talking about and the way that you approach it. I think that, I don't know what the podcast numbers are, but I know that your YouTube numbers should definitely be a lot higher compared to some shit that I see on there that's getting millions of views. But
that's the sensationalized nonsense. They put people in with false claims, and then they sensationalize it all up. Look at this, we have aliens, and
it's clickbait.
Yeah, it's clickbait, and it fits what people already believe. Whereas we're presenting something that's sort of an alternative to that. Like, let's think a little deeper about this. Let's not accept the assumptions. and let's find people who are coming up with new ideas on it.
Do you ever go down rabbit hole? Like for me,
Oh yeah.
the easiest way for me to debunk something is to go down the rabbit hole, because eventually I'm going to watch all the videos, even the debunked ones, and I'm going to start looking stuff up, and and then I develop my own opinion. I don't think enough people do that, and I think that you get the surface skepticism, if you will, your Michael Shermer's, and actually the one episode he did on Joe Rogan with Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson, it was very evident he didn't do his homework, and he got pantsed like in front of millions of people.
Oh yeah,
so,
yeah.
So I think you need to go, whether you believe in the stuff or not. It's if you're going to talk about one of these subjects, you absolutely need to go down that rabbit hole, because you got to have all that information.
Well, I had read an article just recently from the Skeptical Inquirer, and they were talking about psi research. And a few paragraphs in, the guy literally says, well, some of this evidence looks pretty good, but we know psi doesn't exist. So we're not even going to look at the evidence to make, to form our opinions, because we know this stuff is not real. And so there's absolutely no reason to give it any time or to really look deeper into this evidence. And that's that. And I'm just kind of like, really? Like, you're not even hiding this fact now?
Right.
It's belief-based. It has nothing to do with evidence. And I think part of the problem is that the scientific evidence for psi is now so strong that they can't look at it and then say it's not real. Like it's impossible. They've gotten to the point where even some of them have admitted that the evidence is pretty overwhelming, but they're still not going to accept it.
Well, what's the I know in Real Magic, Dean Radin goes over all like the statistics and the numbers. I think it was Rupert Sheldrake's experiment with is somebody looking at you? Like, can you tell if somebody's looking at you? And I think it was like 54%, people could tell, well, right. Even though it's 4%, that's actually kind of a lot, if it's a 50-50 proposition, but it's more than 50-50.
And I don't even think it's a 50-50 proposition. I think it's less than that.
Right.
Because you wouldn't normally think someone's looking at you.
Right. Yeah, it's that weird, and that goes back to the running up the stairs in the dark. We'll pull it full circle with this thing. If intuition's real, which we know intuition's real, even most scientists, will concede to that, then what is our intuition telling us that there's something there,
Or again, it's a race memory of, dark is bad.
Yeah. Epigenetics, being hunted by saber-toothed tigers in the dark and shit, But all right, well, thank you for coming on, Seriah. This was awesome. We'll have to have you back on in the future, because there's a million other things we could have talked about too. So
that is true.
That was nice. That was a very good dose of reality, I think.
Do you want to plug anything? You can go to Seriah's website at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Yep. We mentioned at the beginning he's got the radio show. You said it's from 10:30 to 11:30 now.
Yeah, it's 10:30 to 10 to 11:30.
Okay, 10 to 11:30.
That's the first time it airs. Patrons actually get it before that, unless it's live. And then it becomes a podcast after that. And sometimes we do a couple or even 3 shows a week. Only one of them airs on the radio.
Okay.
And I also do a music show that I've been doing 25 years now that airs after that from like 11:30 to 6 a.m. every Saturday.
Oh, shit. So you're
going on over there.
Yeah, you're a real night owl, huh?
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, me too. I'm an insomniac, unfortunately, but
yeah, me too.
Do you have any cool upcoming guests you want to plug that are coming on soon, or just leave it up to the imagination?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing. I just put up the first of a multi-part episode I'm doing with the Snake Brothers, where we kind of take a deep dive into the missing 411 data.
Yeah, those guys are. I listen to their podcast. I like their ancient civilization stuff a lot. They do a good job.
Yes. Yeah, and they had done enough research on the missing 411 stuff that I was like, okay, you guys are perfect, because I've been wanting to do this for a while, because the missing 411 stuff is great. It's really interesting, but I think David's wrong about certain things. So we're kind of like trying to discern, like, okay, what's really anomalous here and what can be explained through more conventional means.
I don't know a ton about it, but I know that's about like missing people that just disappear, right?
Yeah, and he presents. So I mean, some of his facts are just wrong, is all it is.
Gotcha.
And so we're trying to kind of look deeper into those, get the evidence of where he's wrong, where he's right, what's really weird, what's not. Because if you're looking for patterns, you want to get rid of as much of the noise as possible.
Absolutely. Well, like the whole show we've been talking about is what's real, what's not. You got to fine tune the research and the details and really get to the bottom of it. And if you're just trying to sell a book or a movie, eventually it'll become, evident or.
Yeah, well, that's true. That is very true. So yeah, and hopefully I am gonna shoot Graham Hancock an email. Maybe I'll be enough to get him on the show, which would be the third of the 3 people I initially wanted.
Yeah, no,
Well,
we'll be looking for that.
We'll be blasting it into our subconscious for you.
We're sending out rays now, so don't worry about it. Okay.
But yeah, so like I said, he'd be the last of the triarchy. I have not approached him the entire time I did the show. I was on that show with John Anthony West doing the telethon to raise money for his cancer treatments and his medical expenses, and I got to talk to him for a few minutes, and he seemed game, but he's also a really nice guy. So we'll see if he actually is able to do it or not.
No, for sure. And
Nice.
also, we're going to add the links to your website and YouTube channel. Subscribe to his YouTube channel. Let's get those numbers up. This guy's been doing it for a while. He's one of the best at it, folks. So
thank you very much.
All right. Where did the road go with Seriah? Thanks for coming on, man. And check us out at Mike and Maurice, mindescape.com and patreon.com/Mike and Maurice. And this is our last show in this format. So we'll catch you guys in about a week. Peace.